Patty, would you be ready to begin your presentation? And we can go back to Russ if his...
That's fine. Can you see my screen? I shared my screen. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I am going to talk about AI and the codes part, especially the connection with the AI technology part. I must admit that I thought I am probably going to be on the hottest panel of this workshop, but that climate science thing was getting quite warm out there. So we'll see how far we can get there. I have to say that I don't really have any law background at all. I did diligently watch all the LA law episodes while I was a grad student. But I did go back and look at the 2011 reference manual because I'm told that we are trying to figure out what should change in the reference manual with respect to, for example, my technology, AI technology. Turns out there's actually no mention of AI in the 2011 reference manual. Those were the innocent, happy days. Now it's hard to get through a day without mentions of AI everywhere, including, of course, at the courts that we'll talk about in a minute. And I just want to, the few minutes that I want to spend in the beginning is just to give you an idea of what changed, what's the big thing that changed, and also two broad consequences for the courts, one of which is automated decision liability issues, and the other is evidence admissibility issues. So actually, I should point out that, even though there are no problems, mentions of AI before, there's just so many mentions of AI related to criminal issues and court-related issues, including privacy issues, hiring decision issues, fraudsters impersonating people with automated voices, wrongfully accused by algorithm, and of course, autopilots running over people. So there's a whole bunch of these things going on right now. And not to leave it out, even courts are actually using AI technology in some cases as decision support systems, and that has led to all sorts of interesting issues because there were issues of whether or not those tools were actually perpetuating biases are actually kind of wrongly coded. So there are all these issues. As to why this suddenly things changed since like 2011 time, there was no mention of AI. Now we are all talking about this is, there's a lot that can be said. I have a bunch of columns that, people interested can look up, but I just want to mention it, like 2 points, which is significant progress into systems with perceptual intelligence capabilities. AI has been around since at least 1956 when the term was coined in a Dartmouth conference. And much before that, ever since, humans have always been trying to make machines smarter than them. What changed in the last, 10 or so years is the improved ability to see, hear, and read, and also show, say, and write. Okay, so actually perceive the world and create synthetic reality. And this has been sort of enabled as well as been deployed widely through the web, internet, and cell phone technologies that, of course, Jeremy was mentioning. There's a bunch of impressive feats. I just want to get a sense of people who may not have looked at it already before. Like, for example, machines can look at pictures and give captions to them. They can make up people. All these people actually don't exist at all, and you can't tell who is a real person, who is not a real person. This is the other version of Jeremy's question. I normally show two of these pictures and ask which of them is a real person and which of them isn't, and most of the people can't tell. And then we can write, AI systems can write prose, and actually economist once said that an entire article, actually they even had an essay written by AI system graded by human judges. And of course, Guardian was publishing these AI-produced editorials. Now, and of course, many of you have probably already seen this. This is sort of the most important thing.
An era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right.
Okay. So I'm sure you probably heard about this, but this sort of, there's obviously in this particular case, Obama wasn't at all saying any of this, but you can't tell if you don't know. And, in the case of Obama, we know that guy is whatever he's doing pretty much 24/7. If, you get a video of me saying something, you have no idea whether I actually said it or whether it was made up. This is going to have major issues in the courts of law. So why are these things what are the problems that these things are going to cause in courts? Liability issues for automated decisions. Many decisions by the companies nowadays, including loan approvals, job interviews, etc., are increasingly made by automated systems. When these decisions are erroneous and cause injury to somebody, some party, courts have to wrestle with who is to be held liable. Now, in these systems right now, some of them have human in the loop, human pretty much checking every part of the decision. Some only have human on the loop, human sort of signing off on the decisions, and some have human completely out of the loop. They're just made by the machines already. So the tricky issue in actually apportioning blame in these scenarios is that the modern machine learned decision-making systems, unlike the normal software that already, Jeremy talked about, these are essentially programs not written by human, but are often learned from data. So it's essentially, there's nobody to point to saying, you made the system do this. This raises all sorts of issues about diligence with the training data set and how it was curated. I just want to mention this, that there is this difference between the traditional programs where human programmers write the computer code, and if there is a problem, they have to debug it, and if there is a problem, you can go and fire them. In the newer machine learned programs, human programmers only write a general sort of a schema to how to learn from data. This general code is then trained on massive amount of data that's out there in the world, the stuff that you put up on the web, the stuff I put up on the web, and so on. And this learned program then executes and makes a decision. In such cases, when errors are made, it's a complex combination of the general code schema and the training data. Quite often, the errors actually come from the training data, the data that the companies didn't make up. That's the representation of the world out there. In fact, an influential study showed that commercial gender recognition systems have very high error rates for non-white male subjects. And mostly because they were trained on easily available data that just happened to be unbalanced towards mostly white male faces. And so they could figure out that, and others, they were having more errors. So in fact, when these decisions are being made, things like European Union's GDPR tries to say you should give explanations for any automatically made decisions. That looks like a good idea, but there's a second order problem with it because, in fact, explanations are often reconstructive, and you can lie. Machines can learn to lie by telling you what you want to hear, and that brings up its own issues. A second point about liability issues in automated decisions is this sort of biased decisions. Because the data set underneath is biased to begin with, there may be decisions that are sort of either introducing or perpetuating existing biases in the society or in that particular data set. Again, this issue, this was actually come up very interestingly in the context of a system called Compass that was used in Broward County court system. Judges were using this to figure out partly whether or not a particular defendant is likely to be go back to a life of crime. So this is a recidivism prediction system. And it turned out that it had all sorts of interesting technical problems that people have figured out afterwards. So again, the issue here is complicated by the way bias often gets introduced inadvertently through training data, rather than by an engineer sitting there and saying, let all the brown-skinned Indians be discriminated against. In that world, it's much easier because a judge can then find them guilty. This is a much harder world we are living in. Can companies be made liable for poor data set curation diligence? This is the kind of thing that we need to start thinking about. The second broad area is basically evidence and witness admissibility issues that AI is going to bring. The advent of deep fakes, specifically the kinds of things that I've shown you, the fact that we can make people's faces, I can write things, AI systems can write things, they can make Obama say anything you want. This has brought in the ability to generate very convincing forgeries of image, videos, and voice. This could have quite significant ramifications to evidence admissibility and eyewitness testimony. As of now, there are some still technological solutions that may sometimes be able to tell apart synthetic media from the real ones when the people can't tell that. So that might, courts might be able to still depend on that. But this is a moving target. And at some point of time, it will be increasingly harder to tell synthetic and real images, synthetic and real voice, etc. apart. I make this joke that, Charlie Chaplin used to apparently took part in this Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest and came in second. In future, we'll all be Charlie Chaplins. We'll all be a poor second to our own selves. And, the question then is what are courts going to do about culpability, about liability, etc., about those things. Society itself might move to cryptographic authentication techniques eventually, but in the interim, legal challenges are going to be quite complex, and we need to start thinking about that. A related issue in evidence and witness admissibility is something that Jeremy brought up, which is because we are not only sort of leaving digital footprints all over the place, everything is connected to internet and is probably spying on you and probably telling stuff to others. Add to that the AI's ability to analyze patterns in these massive amounts of data. There are going to be very interesting privacy issues. For example, there may be ways of stitching together footprints, some captured with my consent and some without my consent, to make a convincing case against me in the court of law. And then the judge has to figure out, is this admissible evidence against law or not? So AI and the courts, the summary is since 2011 reference manual, there have been quite significant advances in AI, especially in the perceptual intelligence tasks. Things are going to increase, of course, but right now already we have this perceptual intelligence task. We are doing reasonably well compared to 10 years back. And the widespread deployment of these technologies brings up thorny issues to the courts, including automated decision liability issues, which are complicated by the training dataset biases, and evidence admissibility issues, which are again complicated by the privacy issues. In a way, I think maybe we should have stuck in 2011. Imagine the world which didn't have AI, which didn't have deepfakes, which didn't have dataset bias. Maybe we would have had little thinner reference manual, but that's not the case. We have to deal with these issues. So I'm going to stop here and we'll get back. Thank you.
Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating.